The NFL schedules just got released, and that means we're one step closer to Super Bowl 59. That leaves the question because around the league, there are still 12 teams that have yet to win their first Lombardi trophy. So today, Amir, he's joining the show, and we're going to be looking at those 12 teams. Who's most likely to end their drought, make some history, and win their first Super Bowl? Amir, welcome to the show. How you feeling?
I'm feeling great, man. Another episode. I'm excited.
Yeah, episode 174. We're not going to waste any time. Let's get into it. So you see here, of course, we have these bars. The more it's filled up, the more likely they are, or we believe they are, to win the championship or the Super Bowl this season. Again, not 5 years down the line, not 10 years, this year. So for the Panthers here, we're going to have three teams here at the bottom that are at number 10, and the Panthers are one of them. Again, they spent a lot of money this offseason. They've revamped this offense, and they're now going to give Bryce Young no excuses going into next year. You played bad last year, but you didn't really have any help at all outside of an aging Adam Thielen, who had a great year in his own right. But this year, they brought in Robert Hunt. They brought in some other options around Bryce Young. And this year, I think he's going to have a bounce back year. I think it's no doubt he's going to show why he was worth that number one overall pick. Now, is he going to be better than CJ Stroud? I doubt it, right? But I think Bryce Young's definitely going to prove he can be their franchise quarterback going forward. But your thoughts here about this Panthers team, Amir, and I guess how likely are they to you to win the Super Bowl this season?
Yeah, this team is still a long way to go. But I would kind of agree with you there. This team did a good job of surrounding him with some more pieces. I mean, they got Deontay Johnson, brought in, the
They
dude
really
from
get.
South Carolina, Leggett, right? And I think they have some pieces to kind of get something going here to kind of show us potential off. But it's still a long way to go. I still think they absolutely have no chance. But I mean, I would say, I mean, in that division, last year, I mean, them only winning two games, and they still made games competitive. With Tampa Bay, with the Falcons as well. So I think this year, Bryce Young could really show us potential off.
Yeah, I wouldn't be shocked if this team ends up as like a 7, 8, 9 win football team, as crazy as that might
Yeah.
sound. But again, ultimately, you lost Brian Burns, you extended Derek Brown, and you still have one of our favorite corners in the league, Amir, and J.C. Horn. They're
Right.
not locking down a lot of receivers. Panthers, again, rebuild year, maybe a couple years down the line. For the Arizona Cardinals, look, I have a Kyler Murray bobblehead behind me. I'm one of the biggest Kyler Murray fans you'll find on this platform. I believe he's super underrated. And again, when he's had talent, he's done well. However, for this team this year, John Gannon's second year, they drafted Marvin Harrison Jr. Of course, they have some other pieces they brought in around Kyler Murray. They brought in Trey Benson, my favorite running back in the class. And of course, they addressed this offensive line in the draft as well. This is a team that's coming into this year after losing some pieces on defense this offseason. And I just don't think they're going to have enough defensively in this division, let alone to make it into the playoffs and then to make it to win the Super Bowl. So again, rebuilding gear, but I'll give them a 1 out of 10 here in 2024.
Yeah, this team, last year before Kyler came back, they looked completely lifeless. When he came back, he actually, played competitive. I think he beat Seattle, when he came back, and he almost beat Philly, before they started to really decline heavily. And so, I think for this team, they still have a lot of holes, like you just mentioned. I think they're similar to Carolina, where it's like, you have your guy, you have your quarterback, you bring in some more pieces around him, but they're still just missing way too much. So I'm with you as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, we've talked about it before. You're really high. You think Marvin Harrison has the potential, again, they're bold predictions, potential to break some rookie records this year. I think that this is going to be more so of a running offense. I'm just going to throw it out there because John Gannon is under that, Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan tree where there are primarily a running offense. And of course, they build with the play action as far as the passing game. So I think it's going to be a running offense. And I think ultimately, even though I love Kyler, that's going to help them win more games than we think here in 2024. But on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely do you think they are to make the playoffs, Amir? Do you think there's any chance that this team could squeak by?
Honestly, I don't think so at all. I mean, both, both sides of the division are even better this year. Even more stacked. And, we kind of mentioned this months ago. That, the NFL right now, and it's real top heavy. It seems like there's a lot of people that's going to be on the fringe of making the playoffs. 9-win teams, and after that, it's a huge drop off.
Yeah. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
absolutely. Moving over to the last team that is at the 1 out of 10, rather. So these teams, in our eyes, as far as the averages between what Amir thinks and I think, these are the bottom three teams as far as how likely they are to raise the Lombardi this season. And the last team here is the Minnesota Vikings, and I have them at number one for this reason. Sam Darnold and JJ McCarthy. You know, I've come on this channel, I've made videos about JJ McCarthy. I think he's going to be a solid NFL pro. But again, you just don't have that quarterback to, again, win the Super Bowl. And that's the topic of today's video. Make the playoffs? I said the Vikings are going to be a team that's right outside of making the playoffs going into this year, which might sound crazy because they've lost Daniel Hunter and some other pieces defensively. And they also lost Kirk Cousins. But offensively, there's so much talent around these quarterbacks where even if they just do the bare minimum, I think they can be a team that is right on the fringe of making the playoffs. However, defensively, it's not there for me. And of course, this division has only gotten better. But your thoughts here about the Minnesota Vikings? You're a little bit higher on them to me.
Yeah, this team, I have them at a 3 just because of, roster construction. And, we've been talking about this for the past couple of weeks. The fact that they got Jordan Addison coming back for a second year, with Justin Jefferson, he should probably be healthy. You go ahead and you pick up Aaron Jones and you have a solid O-line. And so, I think this team is way too good for to go ahead and put them at a 1 or 2. And also, I think, for this team going into this year, even if they have a guy like Darnold who, just spent the year, under Shanahan, with San Fran, I think for him, he's going to come, a little more confident, experienced and win his team some games.
Yeah, I mean, if you had to guess, I'm sure you would say probably older, right? But Sam Darnold's only 26 years old. So
Which is
hypothetically,
crazy.
he's only entering the prime of his career. And he's shown flashes when there's structure around him. He looked
Yeah.
okay there for San Fran last year in moments. Maybe he can be their guy. Maybe JJ McCarthy ends up sitting a year or two because Sam Darnold is actually going to be a decent quarterback. Again, time will tell. But Sam Darnold or JJ McCarthy and the defense, kind of the reason I have them at a 1. But when we talk about the Tennessee Titans, here's when we get into teams that we believe actually kind of have a decent chance to win it all this year. Again, long shots for some of these teams, like the Tennessee Titans. You made a lot of additions this offseason, right? You bring in, most notably, Calvin Ridley. And of course, Will Levis is coming back for year number 2. You bring in Tony Pollard. You have some additions elsewhere besides that. You have a new head coach now running the show here in Tennessee. I'm interested to see how this team is going to play offensively. Are they going to be an air-raided offense because Will Levis showed he can do that last year? Or is this team going to be more so focused on the ground game with guys like Tajay Spears and Tony Pollard? Time will tell. But to me, I'll give the floor to you because the Titans, again, made a lot of additions. A lot of people are super high on them, especially with the additions of L'Jarius Sneed, Chidobe Awuzie, some stars there in their defensive backfield. Your thoughts about the Titans and how high are you that they can make some history this year?
This team is extremely underrated. And, obviously I don't have, crazy high expectations for them to, go ahead and win 10 games, 11 games and make the playoffs. But, this team is very underrated. I'm seeing people kind of overlook Will Levis, but Will Levis showed some promise last year with that terrible, terrible roster around him. And, this team goes ahead in the offseason and the draft, attack every weakness that they have. And, offensively, they have some pieces, Pollard, D-Hop and stuff like that. You go ahead and address the O-line situation through the draft as well. And you go ahead and draft one of the most underrated corners, Awuzie as well. And so, I think for this team going into this year, I could easily see them winning about 7-8 games for sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Again, when you bring in the Jerry Sneed for a cheap in our eyes, and then of course Chidobe Awuzie, like you mentioned, one of the most underrated corners there, especially in Cincinnati for some time. But again, brought in J.C. Latham as well, so you touched on that there. It's definitely going to be an interesting season there in Tennessee. But once upon a time, this team was 1 yard short of winning a Lombardi Trophy with Steve McNair. Couldn't get over the hump with Eddie George as well. But again, maybe this year they can get that extra yard. I just don't see it this year. But I gave them a 3 for the simple fact that they made defensive, they made a lot of improvements on the defensive side of the ball. And with those improvements on the defensive side of the ball, I think it gives them a legitimate chance to sneakily win this division. Again, it's a long shot. I would prefer 3 other teams over them in this division. Maybe just 2 with the Colts and Texans. But they definitely have a shot here in Tennessee. You gave them a 1. For the LA Chargers, it is a new day here in LA because you bring in Jim Harbaugh after he dominated the collegiate level for so many years. Of course, he capped it off with a national championship. He comes into this team, and you can tell what this offense is going to look like. They get rid of Keenan Allen. They traded him away. They traded away, or they cut rather, Mike Williams. And they go into this draft, and they address this offensive line and this run game. They bring in Joe Alt, and this is a team that brought in Greg Roman to run the offense as well. This is going to be a team that with Jim Harbaugh, Greg Roman, and losing some receiving options. They're going to be a run first team. That is what Jim Harbaugh has always done, no matter where he's been, no matter what his role has been. It's been a run first, pass later kind of thing. Take your shots when they're there. Your thoughts here about the Chargers? Justin Herbert, he's such a talented quarterback. Can that talent be enough for this team to raise the Lombardi here?
I'm kind of in a weird spot with this team because the past couple of months you kind of brought up how this is going to be a run heavy team, which I understand, but I'm looking at this receiving core, and this receiving core is not where it needs to be for this team to make progress. And I understand they're going to be run first, but in a primarily passing league, I feel like if your run game isn't at the top of the league, like the top two or top three, you can't really make much of an impact. And so, this team tried to make some, push for some receivers, DJ Chark, Lab McConkey, I think is underrated, but this team is still far away, but I think the defense is definitely going to greatly improve. Obviously, the O-line is going to greatly improve. It might be the best O-line Herbert has had since he's been in the league. I think Herbert's going to show some promise, but I think this year's going to be off a rebuild year, and I think next year, since they're going to have the O-line, the running backs, the run game, and the defense, then they're going to really push for receivers, and this team's going to make a run.
Yeah, Lad McConkey is such a great separator, and I think
Yeah.
it really just reminds me of this Michigan offense that we've seen the last couple of years, where they're going to be a running offense, right? And they don't have like the top of the top receiving talent, but they can still get the job done and win football games. For that reason, for the reason I think it's going to be a very safe team that protects the football. They don't make too many mistakes, and they have Justin Herbert. So in the moments where they need to be great, they have the quarterback to kind of take them over the top. I gave them a 4 out of 10. I believe in them just a little bit more than the teams below them because they have that quarterback, and just because of the fact that this offense is going to be a run-centric offense, not too many mistakes, and I'm excited to see if this defense can finally put it together because they've had the talent, or at least the star talent, but they haven't been able to be a dominant defense like we know they should be. So I'm excited to see. I think their defense could be the best that it's been in years, in the Justin Herbert era at least. And given the fact they're not going to make too many mistakes, I have them out of 4 out of 10. Here with the Jacksonville Jaguars, if you asked me this a year ago today, Amir, I said that they were an 8 out of 10. Going into last year, I was so high on this team because of how great they looked down the stretch 2 years ago, especially because they got some playoff experience. I said, okay, their division's not the greatest. They can go out there and make some noise. But I had no idea that C.J. Stroud was going to be C.J. Stroud in year number 1. So, of course, the Jacksonville Jaguars did not pan out, at least the way I thought, especially Calvin Ridley. I guess that bet didn't go well. But this year, they're coming back, and it's a prove-it year. Of course, year 3 now under Doug Peterson. This is a team that 2 years ago overperformed, at least in most eyes. Last year, they underperformed probably by a wide margin. They get rid of Calvin Ridley. They bring in Gabe Davis. You draft Brian Thomas Jr. out of LSU. So you lost Calvin Ridley, but you bring in some good receiving talent to replace it. And you get Christian Kirk back from injury. Of course, you still have ETN and Evan Ingram. You still have some pieces on the defensive side of the ball like Josh Allen, very underrated in his own right. Your thoughts about Duval, and can they get back to what they were 2 years ago?
Honestly, this team, we all got to see. Last year I'm looking at this team like, T-Law's gonna, be an MVP candidate. This team's gonna, push towards exactly, make a run in the playoffs. Possibly an AFC Championship appearance. And I looked at this team last year. They started off slow, but in weeks 4 through 8, they start playing on that level. And I'm looking at the defense. The defense is playing lights out. T-Law was looking good despite him being hurt and dealing with injuries and stuff like that. And, they ended up getting blown up by San Fran and just fell apart, completely fell apart. And I'm looking at this team going into this year. They obviously lost some pieces. They lost Calvin Ridley and they have a whole entire receiving core, full of, wide receiver 2s and 3s. And I think this team is missing a lot despite them having T-Law. The only reason why I have them higher than some other teams is because, I still believe in T-Law's game. He's used to leading teams throughout his total, football career. And, I think, going into this year, this team is going to, hit a huge drop off.
Yeah, definitely a good argument, right? And I think that when we look at their division, that was the biggest factor for me because I like the Colts and the Texans a lot more than the Jaguars. So in that case, they would still have to make the playoffs as a 6-7 seed, and then they would have to take down giant after giant, being the underdog in the playoffs and going to win it all. Look, can they definitely win their division like they did 2 years ago? Sure. Again, like you mentioned, they have the quarterback to do it. I just don't know if I trust them more than, let's say, the Colts or the
Yeah.
Houston Texans, which we'll talk about later. But for those reasons, I'm not going to be burned 2 years in a row. And I think my rating for them is low because of the fact that they made me look stupid last year. I'm going to have them as a 2 out of 10 for the simple fact that, again, I just like the other teams in the AFC much more than them. So I give them a 2 out of 10 for the simple fact that, again, their division is so tough. But I guess it's a good point to mention before we move on, Amir, that what we wanted to do, and I should have mentioned this at the beginning of the show, where you see we're giving these different numbers. What I like to do is give one number for every single slot. That way, we're not giving every single team a 6 out of 10, a 7 out of
Yeah.
10. So when you get to your top 10 teams, you really have to decide who do I believe in more here to win the Super Bowl in 2024. So again, just for the simple fact that we don't give everybody a 6 through 8, I wanted to do one number per slot per team, if that makes sense. Moving over to the NFC side of the coin, we have the Atlanta Falcons, and maybe the team that made the most noise this offseason, whether for the right or the wrong reasons. Well, of course, you started off, you bring in Kirk Cousins, you bring in Darnell Mooney, revamp this offense. You have a new head coach. I guess the biggest thing they did this offseason was get rid of Arthur Smith, and I think we can both agree on that. But you bring in Raheem Morris, of course. Now you have a different outlook, going forward with this team, new identity, and of course you still have all the offensive pieces that have so much untapped potential. Kyle Pitts, Bijan Robinson, Drake London. You bring in Darnell Mooney, you have Kirk Cousins, and then you go into the draft. And this is kind of where it got interesting because instead of addressing your number one needs with Kirk Cousins, you go out there and draft Michael Penix Jr. Well, whatever your thoughts are about that situation, I think we can both understand what they're doing, whether if that was the right decision or not at the time at pick number 8. Again, that's up in the air, but I understand what they're doing, of course, with the blueprint that the Chiefs and the Packers laid out over the last decade or so for the Packers' sake, over the last 35 years with Brett Favre, Rodgers, and now Jordan Love. But this is a team that has the talent. They have a favorable schedule. In fact, Amir, according to the numbers, they have the easiest
Yeah.
schedule going into next year. They're in a division where teams are seemingly either just kind of stuck in mediocrity or they're taking a step back because the Bucks they're going to be pretty much the same team as last year. The Panthers are getting better, but as we've talked about, they're not there yet. And the Saints, they're going to be mediocre yet again. So this is a team that is lined up to not only win their division, but given the fact that they have an easy schedule, they could be a top seed in the NFC. Now, whether we have them there or not, that's remained to be seen. But Amir, your thoughts about the Falcons and their outlook, and can they get their first Super Bowl, especially with the demon behind them of the 28-3 comeback?
Hey, you touched on it perfectly. The fact that this team has the easiest, schedule in the league. I think, I think the percentage of teams that they played last year, their records going into this year is like 43%, which is a super easy schedule. And so I'm looking at the division as well. I mean, the division, I feel like everybody really, either took a step back or are remaining the same. Besides them, they really had a huge jump. And all the fans are so stuck on this Penix pick and focusing on that one. They don't realize this is still a great team, a great roster construction. And I mean, and defensively, they go ahead and add some pieces defensively. Offensively, you got Bijan, who I think is a really, really good running back. Who's going to be great next year. Kyle Pitts, who me and you both have been waiting on. Drake London, Darnell Mooney, and so all you needed was
top 5 offensive line.
and all you needed was a quarterback to kind of take this team over the top and make the playoffs. And so, I'm looking at the fact that this team has an easy schedule and the fact that, I'm confident that they're going to win a division and finish at least as a 4 seed. And so for that sake, I have this team right at about 5. And, I think this team can if teams get hurt in the playoffs or teams end up, being at a disadvantage, this team could honestly, sneakily make some noise with Kirk Cousins at quarterback.
Yeah, no, again, for this team to win, 9 games last year, 8, 9 games with Desmond Ridder, with the combination of Desmond Ridder as your quarterback and Arthur Smith as your head coach, that should tell you how talented this offensive line, these weapons around the quarterback, and that defense is. Like you mentioned, they just needed that quarterback, and they got one. Well, 2 of them now with Kirk Cousins and Michael Penix. Excited to see what they can do, but again, we both believe they can win the division. And given their schedule, they could be dangerous in the NFC as far as having home field in the postseason. So I gave them a 6. You gave them a 5 out of 10. But then we move over back to the AFC side of things. Your favorite quarterback in the league, Josh Allen. or at least you defend him like he's your favorite quarterback in the league. But again, this is a team that lost. Well, I guess you can say they lost Stephon Diggs, no doubt about it. Talented receiver when he's not being a head case, but that could be a plus and a minus because you lost Stephon Diggs, but now you don't have to worry about. Well, I guess if you're Josh Allen, you don't have to have your star receiver breathing down your neck. Hey, I need the ball. I need to be the reason we're winning football games. So you have that, I guess, that off your shoulders now going forward if you're the Buffalo Bills, and it's a prove-it year. I think it's a huge year for Sean McDermott to prove that he belongs. This new offensive coordinator that they got at the midseason mark last year, he's back, and this is going to be an offense that's more comfortable in this scheme. You still have James Cook. Well, again, we saw last year. This is going to be a run-focused offense, right? And let Josh Allen be great later down the games, which is kind of why I like the LA Chargers because they have the quarterback to put them over the top when it's needed. But for the Buffalo Bills, James Cook's going to be back. He's going to be better than ever. Dalton Kincaid, you brought in last year, of course, through the draft from Utah. And he had a great rookie season after he took over from Dawson Knox. You brought in Keon Coleman. This defense is still there for the most part, even though you lost a lot of your secondary. You still have an okay defense at the bare minimum, Amir. You have a great front seven. Your thoughts about the Buffalo Bills? To me, I think there's a chance they miss the playoffs. But your thoughts about the Bills here and how likely are they with Josh Allen to win their first Super Bowl?
Yeah, seeing Josh Allen, in the playoffs, even though he's coming up short, we've never had to question his performance in the playoffs. He plays great, every single year, but the team kind of comes up short. And so, I'm looking at, his history, him performing at the highest level. And, this team did lose a lot. I mean, the whole entire secondary is basically gone. But, you bring in Taylor Rapp and stuff like that. But, you lose Trey White, Micah Hyde, and Jordan Poyer, if I'm not mistaken.
A lot.
Which is a lot, but, they kind of somewhat, fixed, their weakness last year was the front seven. They completely revamped that front seven, which is, probably their strong point, as a team. But, you honestly hit on it perfectly. Last season they kind of switched the offense up into a run-focused offense and, completely won. But I'm worried because, this year I'm not sure if you can really do that. To be completely honest. Having a guy like Diggs out there, having that third out there, making teams scheme up against him, it doesn't matter if he has 30 yards receiving for 6 weeks straight. Having that guy out there kind of putting pressure on defenses helped them. Exactly. This year I'm concerned about that. You have a rookie receiver, you have Curtis Samuel, which is, a complete concern, especially come playoff time. We have to depend on those guys to catch passes. And so
you don't believe in Khalil Shakur?
Honestly, Shakur is extremely underrated, though, in my opinion. But I have this team at a 7 just because the team's under them. I'm putting my chips on Sean McDermott, on Josh Allen, on these guys because they honestly been there before.
Yeah, there's definitely the argument where it's even a team that misses the playoffs could be better than teams that are actually in the playoffs. Whether if it's harder schedule or injuries hit a teams a different way. But the Buffalo Bills, I think they're a better team. I think they have a higher potential than any other team that I've mentioned. I have, for example, the Falcons have a 6 over the Buffalo Bills, which I gave a 5. That's only for the fact that I have the Falcons making the playoffs and the Bills missing it. So again, logically, if you miss the playoffs, you don't have a great chance at all to win the Super Bowl, let alone a playoff game. So that's the only reason I have the Falcons over them. But again, when we talk about a team basis, a team to team, I think the Bills are definitely a better team than I'll say this, they have a higher potential than the Atlanta Falcons because they have arguably the second best quarterback in the league in Josh Allen. And that quarterback and the solid team around him should be enough to get you over the top, right? But again, just for the simple fact that I have the Bills missing the playoffs and the Falcons making it, I gave them just a little bit of a higher ranking. But you touched on it there. Josh Allen, he's going to have to be Superman this year. But again, that's nothing new for Josh Allen. So I guess it all just depends on how quickly Keon Coleman comes around. I think he's the X factor for this team because we know he has the potential. This is the dude that was a 4-star in basketball before he made the switch over to football. And you see his athletic ability transfer to the field. I'm interested to see how quickly he comes around because when you can have a guy like Jordan Addison that needs a month to get into the groove of things, or you can have a guy like Puka Nacua come out of the 5th round out of an Ivy League school and be an all-pro from day one. How
best receiver in the league
is Keon Coleman going to come around? That's the biggest question for me because we know Dalton Kincaid's going to be there. James Cook's going to be solid as well as this offensive line. How quickly are these receivers going to come around? And can Curtis Samuel stay healthy? That's another big question. Moving over to our hometown Cleveland Browns. And let us be biased here. Let us be biased because growing up, what have we had? Three playoff appearances in our lifetime?
Yeah,
Two of them.
I think
But this
too.
is a team that, to me, of course, the numbers came out officially. We have the hardest schedule based off the numbers going into this year, which sucks as a Browns fan. But to me, I don't care who we play because if our quarterback is 80% of what he was in Houston, the guy that we traded for and paid money for, and if our defense is 80% of what it was last year, it doesn't matter who you line up in front of us. We're going to have a shot, a good shot against each and every team coming up. So to me, it doesn't matter who's on our schedule. If our quarterback comes to play and he's healthy, and if our defense takes a little bit step back, we won't say it's the number one defense. Let's say they're, the sixth ranked defense, we'll say. It's still a top 10 defense. We have a really good shot against everybody. So to me, I don't care about the schedule. I give this Cleveland Browns team, as crazy as it might sound, a 7 out of 10 because we added Jerry Jeudy. So our offense has gotten better. It's only going to be better with Deshaun Watson. I mean, this is a team with Joe Flacco that made it to the playoffs as an 10-11 win football team. We get a quarterback that should be the reason we're winning, not our defense, back into the mix. If he's healthy, again, Amir, I think this team can win 11 or so games.
Yeah, definitely. And, I'm looking at the Browns, season last year, them having all these injuries. And in fact, I mean, they beat a healthy San Fran team. They beat Baltimore in Baltimore, in a crazy comeback win. They dominated this top-ranked Jets defense and dominated, Jacksonville, all with backup quarterbacks. And so I'm looking at, how the season went. The fact that we were a 5 seed, clinched a 5 seed spot in what, week 15 or week 16, something like that. And, despite we have the hardest schedule, I'm still confident in this team. I'm a little nervous just because the AFC is extremely loaded. But I mean, this team is honestly, right where we want them to be as far as talent wise. And those weaknesses that they had last year, they completely addressed. You completely, revamp the front seven, have a solid draft. You go ahead and bring in Jared Jeudy, another good receiver. The O line is coming back healthy, and you add depth to the O line as well through the draft. And so, I'm right on board with you. The fact that it doesn't matter who's in front of us. This team's going to be able to compete regardless.
Yeah, and when we talk about playoff time, especially this Kansas City Chiefs team, right? Their defense was, their defense was great last season. But when it came to the playoffs, they had the defense and they had the quarterback to get them over the top. Deshaun Watson is not Patrick Mahomes, let me be clear. But we arguably have a better defensive unit than the Chiefs did last year. So if our quarterback, again, can be 80% of what we traded for, I think we got a shot against anybody, like I mentioned there. But the Cleveland Browns, of course, we could be delusional. They could come into this year and just fall flat on their face. But I will say this, Amir, something that we got to just keep in the back of our minds. Jim Schwartz is going to be a head coach here in 2025.
Yeah,
so this is the last year with this defensive scheme. We got to put it together, right? Because if not, whether if we win or lose, Jim Schwartz is going to be a head coach in this league. And I'm afraid it won't be for the Cleveland Browns. So we got to win this year. we got to win this year, even though it is a long shot. It's just something we got to keep in the back of our minds. For the Cincinnati Bengals, they are a division rival. Last year, I said they were my Super Bowl favorite. Injuries got in the way, and in fact, a lot of big ones. And of course, their season kind of fell flat on their face after Joe Burrow went down. But this is a team that did lose their best cornerback. Of course, they might still lose T. Higgins before the start of the season. But I think at this point in the offseason, T. Higgins is at least going to play the season out or play out this contract with the Cincinnati Bengals. This is a team that's coming back with Ja'Marr Chase, Joe Burrow, T. Higgins. This offense is going to be electric. They've only added depth to their offensive line, bringing in, Amarius Mims out of Georgia. I don't know how you're going to see past this offensive line. I don't know how Joe Burrow is going to complete passes, Amir. You have 3 guys that are 6'8" on this offensive line. I don't know how Joe Burrow is going to be able to see more so than 5 yards down the field. But on the defensive side of the ball, you still have a solid unit. You have a great defensive coordinator. You did lose a lot, though. So the defensive pieces that you've lost worry me. But I still think the Bengals, when you have Joe Burrow, when you have an elite quarterback, you have a chance. So to me, I'm pretty high on the Bengals for yet again this year. I just need them to stay healthy.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on it perfect. You lose Reader on the D line, in the interior, you lose some pieces on defense. But I mean, you have Burrow, Chase, and T. Higgins, and at this point, the reason why I've had the Bengals kind of lower, not super low, but lower, these past weeks is because I'm thinking T. Higgins is going to be gone. But as of right now, he's still on the team, and you have those three. This offense is going to be, a complete problem regardless of who they play. And so, it doesn't matter if they have the bottom ranked defense. This team is always going to push for the playoffs, always push for a run with this offense.
Yeah, I mean, again, this team is talented as can be. Can they put it together? I'm still not a big fan of Zach Taylor, but as we've seen, the talent on this team has gotten Zach Taylor to the Super Bowl before. Again, they still have Trey Hendrickson on this defensive line. They still have Chris Hubbard, very solid defensive line, in its own right. Do they have the secondary? I'm not sure, but that again, we got to wait and see. We both gave them an 8 out of 10, so that leaves two teams, Amir. When we talk about either the Detroit Lions, imagine the Lions being the Super Bowl champions. Absolutely insane to think about. And the Houston Texans. Again, two teams that have never won the Super Bowl. Texans are the newest franchise in the NFL, and we're going to talk about them now. Here, the Houston Texans last year, they, of course, brought in a new head coach, DeMeco Ryans. They draft C.J. Stroud, and then they pull off a draft day shocker. They trade up for the number 3 pick, and they get Will Anderson as well. So they got their captains on both sides of the ball, and, of course, they had some veteran pieces around these young, talented people. So then we went into last year in Amir. I think their Vegas betting line was at 5 wins. I mean, and I had the same thought. I said this team was going to be at most a 6-win football team because of the youth that they had in the key positions, the quarterback and the head coach. Well, just like the rest of America, I was proven wrong. This team went on to win 11 games, be dominant offensively and defensively. And this is a team that won what? What did they win? 10 or 11 games? And that was with C.J. Stroud missing 3 or 4 weeks late in the season. This team could have been a 12-win football team in year number 1 with C.J. Stroud. We've never seen a rookie quarterback that dominant. Now, whether that's going to carry over, I don't know. Either second year quarterbacks either explode to superstardom or they kind of take a step back into reality. So that is something we have to wait and see. But you add Stephon Diggs, you add Danielle Hunter, both guys on very cheap deals to bring them in their own right. You have a solid draft. You have some guys coming back. Amir, where's the hole on this team? Can you see them finally getting over that top, getting over the hump? Because, again, this is a team that went from Andre Johnson and being the newest franchise with Mario Williams. And just, 10 or so years later, well, I guess 20 years later, now that I think about it, I'm getting old. The Texans now are finally in a position where they can be a Super Bowl contender. Can they get over the hump?
This team has no weaknesses. I mean, the only weakness I would say they have, is their safety play. But besides that, I mean, you're so dominant up front. At this point, does it even matter? I mean, and the receiving core is loaded. You got Tank Dell coming back, this year. You got Nico Collins, Diggs, like you mentioned. I mean, you add Joe Mixon, the old line gets better. And, I'm looking at this team, and it's like, even if C.J. Stroud takes a step back, this team is so loaded to the point where it's like his numbers are still going to be good. He's still going to be productive. And, I think at this point, there's only a couple teams in the league as a whole, not only, on this list, but in the league as a whole, that, that's really, better than them, talent wise. And this team caught me off guard as well. I was looking at this team in the middle of the year. I'm like, Stroud's playing great. The defense is playing solid, but, I don't see this team, really going on a deep run. And it's still crazy the fact that, they were one missed check down the way by Gardner Minshew of missing the playoffs. They get to the playoffs and they elevate even more in the playoffs and dominate Cleveland. And, the fact that they ended the season on that, going toe-to-toe with Baltimore, going into this year, their confidence is probably at an all-time high right now.
Yeah, I think expectations are definitely through the roof. So interested to see how these guys bounce back. But if we know anything about C.J. Stroud and these young players, they're ready for it, right? Especially with DeMeco Ryans at the charge. But I'm going to ask you this question about the next two teams, this team and, of course, Detroit. For Houston, of course, we know the Kansas City Chiefs. They've won back-to-back Super Bowls. Kansas City has only gotten better. They've only gotten scarier. And now the Chiefs are going for the first ever three-peat in NFL history. So the Chiefs are definitely the team to beat in the NFL and in the AFC, more specifically for this question. Is Houston the best team to do it? Is Houston the best contender to knock off the Chiefs? Or would you say it's someone else?
For me, Houston is definitely, the best roster construction in the AFC to do it and knock them off. And, we kind of talk about it every year, how Baltimore, always wins 12 or 13 games, makes the playoffs, and, they look scary, but then they end up, falling apart. I think, outside of, Cincy, where Cincy beat them before, I think Houston, schematically and team-wise, they're the best team to do it. The fact that they have a great D line to put pressure on Mahomes. And last year, Mahomes was scrambling for his life. Their O line got better, but last year Mahomes, the second he was pressured last year, he was so used to his O line struggling. He started to take off and run for his life. And I think for this team, they have the personnel to not only put pressure on that Kansas City defense, but also attack them offensively as well.
We'll finish off here with Detroit. Of course, they just held the NFL draft, and now they are in a position with their roster to compete for a Lombardi trophy. Amir, we've talked about it a lot. Last year, NFC title game, first half, they dominate the San Francisco 49ers. Second half, I think they relied on their analytics team entirely too much. I'm not even going to say just a little bit. Entirely too much. And that ultimately cost them in our eyes because there were so many times they could have just took their three or punted the ball instead of going for it on fourth down. Using their football minds instead of the analytical minds, excuse me. And I think they could have went to the Super Bowl. And now would they have beaten the Kansas City Chiefs? I don't know. They beat them in week 1. Again, Chiefs didn't have Kelsey or Chris Jones. It's a lot of what ifs. However, this year, they come back, they have a better roster, right? They have an amazing draft, bringing in guys like Terrion Arnold, who fell down the board, arguably the best cornerback in the class. You bring in Ennis Rackstraw down the board. Amir, we talked about it on our one and only mock draft. We had him going in the first round because we like the talent of Rackstraw so much. Offensively, of course, you still have Jahmyr Gibbs, talented offensive line. You re-signed Jared Goff. Amon-Ra St. Brown, we think could be arguably a top 5 wide receiver on a yearly basis. And I don't know if I mentioned, but I'll mention him again. Jahmyr Gibbs, of course, coming back for year number 2 after he was so dominant in year number 1. You talked about him earlier. DJ Reader also made his way over to Detroit. Your thoughts here about the Lions. Can Detroit be, as Browns fans, we can share a lot of similarities as them, as frustrations as fans, but can this finally be the year for them to get over the top?
This team, kind of proved me wrong last year. Because for the simple fact that, I think throughout the year, despite them winning, 12 wins, I think, you kind of saw moments where it was like the moment was too big for them throughout the year. I mean, they ended up hitting, 10 wins, 11 wins, and it seemed like at times they're kind of like, okay, we never hit this before. But, you kind of saw through the playoffs, when they beat the Rams and the Bucks, you saw their confidence meter and them realizing that, hey, like we could actually, win this thing, go up, and shoot the roof. The fact that, you play Kyle Shanahan and the Niners, in the NFC Championship and you lose, I don't hold it against him that much. Because he's proven he's a proven coach. But heading into this year, you only get better. You attack the weak spots, which was your secondary. You bring in Carlton Davis, a veteran corner. You go ahead and you add, two first round talents at corner. You got Brian Branch there as well, who I think is a really good DB. And so, in the D line also as well, we've always been stressing the past year, take pressure off of Hutch, adding another D lineman. You bring in Reader, who had 13 sacks last year. It's not something crazy like
2
that.
2 years ago, I think last year. Wait, regardless, go ahead.
Right? Yeah, insane. The best offensive line in football, the best running back duo, and the biggest thing too. You bring in James Williams for an entire year instead of him, being suspended for the first half of the year. And so, looking at this team going into this year, I have this team, making a Super Bowl personally. You watched the episode a couple weeks back. I haven't gone all the way in. And, this team is absolutely loaded. I don't see any team in the NFC really stopping them outside of Philly and San Fran.
Let me clarify what Amir meant to say. To clarify, I'll say this. DJ Reader only has 9.5 career sacks last year, or in his career. But he had 13 tackles for loss last year. So that's...
Or TFLs, yeah.
I'm assuming that's what Amir meant. It just sounded a little funny to me that DJ Reader... Because I know he got hurt last year, right? So for him to get hurt and still have 13 sacks, I was like... Where was I at, right? But definitely 9.5 career sacks. That's actually surprisingly low for a guy that's consistently a perennial All-Pro here in the NFL. But I'm sorry, we just got some news about NCAA, and I'm still reading up on it because I'm excited for the game. But I'm not going to hold back, right? Both of us have them at number 10. We think they're the most likely team here to win the Super Bowl in 2024. But I want to ask you again. Are they the biggest threat to San Francisco? San Fran, they've only gotten better after last year being so dominant. Are they the biggest threat to San Francisco to take them out here in the playoffs? Because we both have them, as the number 1 seed in the NFC this year. But are they going to be good enough to beat San Fran in the playoffs?
Yeah, I think they definitely are. And and personally, the only other team I have, kind of contesting San Fran outside of Detroit is Philly. But the way Philly fell apart last year, I'm still hesitant. But Detroit, I mean, the sky's only the limit. I mean, they've only gotten better in every aspect, every weak spot they've gotten better. And they didn't really have any significant losses. And so you also have a coaching staff who's coming back, even more hyped, ready to go. And the culture, I think that's the biggest word for this team is culture. They have arguably the greatest culture, in the league. I mean, they have a whole group of guys that can believe anybody, and that's the biggest thing. And so, this coaching staff, have the utmost confidence, the utmost faith and hope, and the fact that they're going into this year after just beating Sean McVay, being up by 3 scores against San Fran in the first half, man. I mean, they have confidence that they can walk through anybody.
Yeah, no, I think they're definitely the biggest threat to San Fran. But again, it's so close with those top three to me. I'm a little bit higher
Yeah.
on Philly than you. But speaking about Philly and speaking about these NFL schedules, Amir, we talked about it last year. The Philadelphia Eagles were a team that started off like what, 10-1, 11 and
Yeah.
1, absolutely insane. And then they ran into a murderer's row of teams to end off the season,
They
besides
ran to
the
Brock
New York
Purdy.
Giants. I'm sorry?
They ran to Brock Purdy.
Yeah, well, I guess that could be the reason why your season falls apart. Hopefully not. But I wanted to bring that up because the schedules have released, and I don't know if you have any thoughts about it, or I don't know if you've looked at the Browns schedule, but the Browns have a relatively, well, I guess as easy as it's going to get for the first half of the schedule. Again, we have those tough games. We play the Cowboys, we play the Eagles, of course, the Bengals and the Ravens as well. But after our bye week, I think it is absolutely insane to the murderer's row of teams we're going to have to go through. We're going to have to play
Those last
Pittsburgh.
5 games.
Those last five. I mean,
Yeah,
I would even say a little bit before that for
yeah.
again these reasons. From week 11 on, we play Pittsburgh 2 times out of 3 weeks, weeks 11 and 13. In the middle of that, we traveled a mile high, maybe the best home field advantage in the league. Now, is their roster there? Is it even remotely close to us? I don't know, but the Browns have kind of struggled against Denver for whatever reason. And again, a big part could be the mile high advantage. So Pittsburgh 2 out of 3 weeks, and in the middle of that, we traveled a mile high. Outside of that, Amir, we have the Kansas City Chiefs, we have the Cincinnati Bengals, the Miami Dolphins, and the Baltimore Ravens to close out the year. Now, if Baltimore runs away with the division, obviously we're going to be playing Tyler Huntley late in the season, but that is
No,
a
we're not.
well, I guess we're going to run through. I mean, I don't see us losing the game. But I mean, that's just a crazy, crazy murderer's row of teams where we're playing literally
Yeah.
the top of the top. I guess it's a good way to ramp up going into the postseason. But just like we saw with Philly last year, they were super healthy, they were dominant. But when they ran through that stretch of teams, they got all banged up, they started to get hurt, and they started to lose games, which killed their confidence. Amir, my question to you. What do you think the Browns' record would have to be, let's say at week 10 before their bye week? What would the record have to be in order for you to feel confident going into that second half stretch of the season? Because to me, as crazy as it sounds, out of the 9 games we've played before our bye week, I think we got to win at least 6 to 7 of them. I'd say probably 7 to be safe.
You know, man, I'm thinking 6 or 7 as well. And, thank God that, I'm confident Baltimore's gonna win the division, because come week 18, we should be playing, Josh Johnson since, Huntley's on the Browns now.
Oh yeah. You're right.
Yeah, and so, you know, man, like I'm looking at the schedule. I think this is probably the best it could be as far as spaced out wise. I'm happy we're not playing, like how Philly had, San Fran, Buffalo, Dallas,
Dude,
Kansas
it was,
City,
it was
all those
crazy.
teams
It
in a
was crazy.
row. Exactly. I'm happy. We got teams that we're familiar with. Playing Baltimore and also playing Cincy rather than us playing out of division teams that we haven't played in a couple years. And so to be confident, I say we should have at least 7 wins passing that bye week. You know what I mean? But I'm happy the fact that, we can kind of build our confidence up and at least, start off, maybe 4-1 or 5-1. We start off with Dallas, and after that, I mean, we got Jacksonville, New York, Las Vegas, and Washington. So we should be able to start off at least 4-1.
Yeah. No, again, now we're the Browns. We'll let Jacksonville or Washington beat us, right? Just because we are the Cleveland Browns. We have to expect that. But to me, again, definitely interesting to see. We have to get out on a hot start. If we don't, I'm worried about the Browns' playoff chances. But last thing I want to touch on before we get out of here is that next week, and again, excuse the background noise if there is, there's a vacuum going, so I think that's my cue to kind of go. But going into next week and for the weeks following that, Amir and I, we're going to be tackling, we're going to be putting our predictions out there. So for the next couple of weeks, it's going to be a great opportunity for us to talk about each and every team, deep dive, and predict their schedules going forward. So starting next week on Thursday, we're going to be going through every single team in the AFC North. We're going to be predicting their schedules, talking about every team. Amir, that's our division. We got to come to play for that one. But we're going to be going through each and every game of every single schedule in that division. And basically, we're going to go through 8 weeks of that. And we're going to predict every team's schedule. We're going to react to that at the end of the year, see how far off we were with injuries, with head coaching changes, fall offs, or I guess surprises. We're gonna react to that at the end of the year. But starting next week, I think it's going to be a great way to talk about every single team, but predict their schedule as well and kind of put our prediction, our 2 cents out there. But Amir, last thoughts before we get out of here. Episode 174 in the books.
Nothing, man. 174 is absolutely crazy. I'm excited that this season is coming closer and closer. I mean, I'm excited to watch the NFL. I'm not excited for my own camp that I got to go through in August, but man, it needs to hurry up because the NBA is almost over with. It's going to be that dry period where it's like it's not NBA or NFL, so it's going to be boring. So, season got to hurry up.
That's what we're gonna have to go through. We have to do some fun stuff on the channel, maybe some drafts or things of that nature. But last thing I'll say is, I don't know if you saw, the Gators have the hardest schedule in college football next year.
Wow, that's crazy.
The Browns have the hardest schedule in the NFL. It's gonna be a long year for me. Going in
Bears.
What?
You got the Bears at least.
Well, I guess as a secondary team. But for the main teams, it's going to be a long year. And of course, the Cavs might have their long off season in front of them as well. We'll have to see how that plays out. But until next week, stay happy, stay healthy. Get out of here.